Get him away from that elevator right now! Heather Coleman's voice echoed across the ICU floor of St. Gabriel Medical Center. Every head turned at once. Nurses froze. Visitors stopped walking. A frightened mother standing near a glass ICU window burst into tears. In the middle of the hallway stood Marcus Reed, a black maintenance worker wearing a Navy uniform and work boots. One hand rested calmly at his side. The other held an access card. Across from him, Greg Stanton, the head of security, grabbed his arm. "You don't belong up here," Greg snapped, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Behind the glass, a 10-year-old boy lay connected to machines. Doctors were rushing around him. The child's condition was deteriorating by the minute. Marcus tried to explain that he needed access to a secured equipment room, but Heather cut him off before he could finish. Several people began recording with their phones. Within seconds, a live stream started. Thousands would eventually watch what happened next. The mother pleaded with security to let Marcus pass, but nobody listened. The countdown clock on the ICU monitor showed 12 minutes before an emergency transfer. 12 minutes that could change a life forever. Yet all anyone seemed focused on was the color of Marcus Reed's skin and the uniform he wore.
Only 3 hours earlier, the morning had begun like any other. Marcus arrived before sunrise, just as he had for years. The city of Chicago was still waking up when he stepped through the employee entrance, carrying a coffee in one hand and a maintenance tablet in the other. Most people barely noticed him. That never bothered him. Marcus preferred quiet work over attention. He greeted nurses by name, fixed broken equipment before anyone complained, and often stayed late to help departments that were understaffed. Few people knew much about him. They saw a maintenance worker and assumed that was the whole story. On that morning, Marcus had been assigned to inspect storage units on multiple floors. One of those units contained a specialized pediatric monitoring module used during emergency transfers. Around noon, an alert appeared in the hospital system. A young patient named Ethan Lawson was experiencing severe complications. Doctors needed the backup monitoring module immediately. Marcus knew exactly where it was located because he had personally overseen maintenance checks on that equipment weeks earlier. Without hesitation, he headed toward the ICU level. He expected a routine task. Instead, he was about to walk directly into a confrontation that would expose far more than a missing piece of medical equipment.
When Marcus stepped off the elevator onto the ICU floor, Heather Coleman noticed him almost immediately. Heather was known throughout the hospital for demanding perfection. Unfortunately, she often judged people before learning who they were. She glanced at Marcus's uniform, then at the secured hallway leading toward the pediatric equipment room. Her expression hardened. "Excuse me," she called out sharply. "What exactly are you doing here?" Marcus calmly explained the emergency request and showed his access credentials. Heather barely looked at them. "Maintenance personnel are not authorized to enter this section without management approval," she replied. Marcus reminded her that the request had come directly through the hospital's emergency system. Heather folded her arms. "Then wait until someone verifies it." Time continued slipping away. 8 minutes remained before Ethan's scheduled transfer. Doctors nearby were becoming increasingly nervous. Marcus suggested contacting the department supervisor, but Heather refused. Instead, she called Greg Stanton. Within moments, the large security chief arrived. Heather pointed toward Marcus. "Remove him from this area until we know who he is." Several visitors watched in disbelief. One young woman quietly began live streaming the encounter. Comments flooded her screen almost instantly. By the time Greg reached Marcus, the hallway felt like a courtroom. Everyone seemed ready to deliver a verdict. Greg demanded identification. Marcus handed over his badge without resistance. Greg barely glanced at it before handing it back. "You're creating a disruption," he said. Marcus looked toward the ICU room. Doctors were now moving faster. The mother stood near the doorway, crying openly. "I'm trying to help," Marcus answered quietly. Heather stepped closer. "Help isn't your responsibility. Stay in your lane." The words hung heavily in the air. Some people lowered their eyes. Others nodded in agreement. The livestream audience grew larger every minute. Thousands of strangers began debating Marcus's character without knowing anything about him. One commenter called him a hero. Another called him suspicious. The young woman holding the phone whispered, "This doesn't feel right." 7 minutes remained. Marcus made one final attempt. "A child needs that equipment," he said. "Please don't make this about me." Heather's response came instantly. "This hospital follows procedures." Greg then placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder and began guiding him away from the secured area. The mother shouted for them to stop, but her voice disappeared. As Marcus was escorted down the hallway, something shifted inside the building. Not in him, in everyone else. People sensed they were witnessing more than an ordinary dispute. Doctors exchanged worried looks. Nurses whispered among themselves. Even Greg appeared uncertain for a brief moment. Yet nobody challenged Heather's authority. Marcus stopped walking and turned back toward the ICU. Through the glass, he could see Ethan's medical team preparing for the transfer. Every second mattered now. Heather remained convinced she had made the correct decision. "Take him downstairs," she ordered. Greg nodded. The live stream had already attracted local bloggers and healthcare commentators. Screens across the city were beginning to replay clips from the confrontation. Marcus finally reached into his pocket and removed his phone. Heather smirked. "Calling a lawyer?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. No. He dialed a number from memory. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. "I think it's time," he said calmly, before ending it. Nothing about his expression changed. No anger, no fear, no frustration. Just certainty. Heather laughed quietly and turned away. She believed the situation was over. She had no idea that within minutes, 3 black SUVs would pull in.
5 minutes after Marcus ended the call, the atmosphere inside St. Gabriel Medical Center changed without warning. Outside the front entrance, 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop in perfect sequence. Their arrival caught the attention of employees, visitors, and security staff alike. People standing near the glass doors watched as several sharply dressed executives stepped out with urgent expressions. One of the receptionists immediately recognized one of them and nearly dropped her tablet. Upstairs, Heather was still speaking with department managers when her phone vibrated repeatedly. She glanced at the screen and frowned. 3 missed calls, then 4, then 6. Before she could answer, another message appeared. It came from the hospital network's regional president. "Where is Marcus Reed?" Heather stared at the text, confused. Downstairs, Marcus stood quietly near the lobby windows. He looked no different than before. The same Navy maintenance uniform, the same worn silver watch. Yet the executives who had just entered the building were moving directly toward him. Greg noticed it first. Every one of them seemed to know exactly who Marcus was. The head executive extended his hand immediately. "Mr. Reed," he said respectfully, "we're here." For the first time that day, Greg's confidence began to disappear. News of the executive's arrival spread through the hospital faster than the original live stream. Staff members who had ignored Marcus earlier suddenly gathered in hallways and break rooms, trying to understand what was happening. Heather hurried downstairs with 2 department directors close behind her. When she entered the lobby, she froze. The regional president of the hospital network was standing beside Marcus, speaking to him as though he were a longtime colleague. Greg remained several feet away, unsure whether to approach or stay back. "What's going on?" Heather demanded. The executive turned toward her. His expression was cold. "That is exactly what we intend to find out." Heather attempted to explain the situation. She described Marcus as a maintenance employee who had violated protocol during an emergency. The executive listened without interrupting. Then he asked a single question. "Did anyone verify his credentials?" Silence followed. Heather glanced at Greg. Greg glanced at the floor. Nobody answered. The executive sighed heavily. "Conference room. Immediately." Within minutes, hospital leadership, legal advisors, department managers, and security supervisors were gathering on the executive floor. The livestream audience continued growing online. Millions of eyes were now waiting for answers. But nobody in that room was prepared for the truth that was about to emerge. The executive conference room overlooked the Chicago skyline. Usually it hosted quarterly reports and budget discussions. Today, it felt more like a courtroom. Marcus sat quietly at one end of the table, while Heather, Greg, and several administrators occupied the opposite side. The regional president stood near a large digital display. "Before we continue," he said, "there is information everyone here should understand." He tapped a button on the screen. A corporate logo appeared. Med Equity Systems. Several executives immediately recognized the name. It was one of the most influential healthcare technology companies in the country. The system developed by Med Equity monitored patient care, equipment performance, and treatment disparities across multiple states. The president looked directly at Heather. "Do you know who founded Med Equity Systems?" Heather shook her head. The president slowly turned toward Marcus. "He did." For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Greg blinked repeatedly as if he had misheard. Heather stared at Marcus in disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered. Marcus remained calm. "No," he answered softly. "It's not." The room fell silent. Years of assumptions shattered in a single moment. But that revelation was only the beginning. Marcus still had not shared the part of the story that truly mattered. Heather's face had gone pale. She searched for an explanation that would somehow restore control of the situation. "If that's true," she said carefully, "why are you working maintenance?" Marcus folded his hands on the table. "Because I wanted to." The answer confused everyone. Then he explained. After selling much of MedEquity years earlier, he had stepped away from public leadership. Instead of spending his life in boardrooms, he chose to observe healthcare systems from the ground level. He wanted to see how patients and workers were treated when executives were not watching. What he witnessed over the years often troubled him. Small acts of disrespect, quiet assumptions, invisible barriers that affected both employees and patients. The regional president then displayed another document on the screen. Ownership records, voting rights, governance agreements. Gasps filled the room. Marcus still held 18.4% ownership in MedEquity systems. More importantly, he retained significant influence over corporate partnerships connected to hospital operations. Heather's hands trembled slightly. Greg lowered his eyes. The lawyer representing the hospital finally spoke. "Even so, that doesn't give him authority over this facility." Marcus looked toward him. "You're right," he said. "Not directly." Then a faint smile appeared. "But we're not finished yet." The door opened before anyone could ask another question. Every head turned. A tall woman entered the conference room, surrounded by senior advisors. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Several executives immediately stood. Heather recognized her at once and felt her stomach drop. It was Dr. Vanessa Brooks, the newly elected chairwoman of the entire hospital network's board. Dr. Brooks walked directly across the room and stopped beside Marcus. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. Then she looked at Heather. "I understand there have been some serious concerns regarding discrimination, emergency response delays, and leadership judgment." Nobody spoke. The silence was overwhelming. Dr. Brooks placed a folder on the table. Inside were screenshots from the live stream, security footage, witness statements, and internal communication logs. The evidence was devastating. Every decision made that afternoon had been documented, every warning ignored, every opportunity to verify Marcus's identity had been rejected. Heather realized there was no escape. Greg looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely. Dr. Brooks then revealed one final fact. Years earlier, Marcus had personally mentored her during the launch of a healthcare equity initiative. "You thought he cleaned your floors," she said quietly. "What you failed to understand is that he helped build the future of modern healthcare." For the first time all day, nobody questioned Marcus. The room remained silent long after Dr. Vanessa Brooks finished speaking. Outside the conference room windows, Chicago's skyline stretched across the afternoon sky, but nobody paid attention to the view anymore. Every eye was fixed on Marcus Reed. The man who had been treated like an inconvenience only an hour earlier now sat at the center of the most important conversation the hospital had faced in years. Heather finally found her voice. "I never intended for any of this to happen," she said quietly. Marcus looked at him without anger. Intent and impact are not always the same thing. The words landed harder than any accusation. Dr. Brooks opened the folder and began reviewing the evidence. Security footage showed Marcus presenting valid credentials. Witness statements confirmed he had repeatedly explained the emergency situation. Internal records revealed that critical minutes had been lost because assumptions were made before facts were checked. The hospital attorney attempted to minimize the damage, arguing that mistakes happen in stressful environments. Dr. Brooks disagreed immediately. "Mistakes happen," she replied. "Patterns happen too." She pointed toward the live stream statistics. Millions of viewers had already seen the incident. News organizations were requesting comments. As discussions continued, another update arrived from the pediatric department. Ethan Lawson, the young boy at the center of the emergency, had been stabilized.
The room collectively exhaled in relief. Yet Marcus knew the outcome could have been very different. A few more lost minutes might have changed a family's life forever. Dr. Brooks turned toward the leadership team. "This isn't only about one employee," she said. "It's about a culture that allowed people to make decisions based on appearances." Heather lowered her eyes. For the first time all day, she seemed to understand the full weight of what had happened. Greg spoke next. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard. "I should have verified everything myself." Marcus nodded. "Yes, you should have." There was no hostility in his answer, only honesty. Then the conversation shifted from blame to responsibility. Marcus surprised everyone when he rejected suggestions for financial penalties or lawsuits. The hospital attorney looked genuinely shocked. "You're not pursuing damages?" Marcus shook his head. "If all we do is punish people, nothing changes. I want solutions." That answer transformed the tone of the meeting. For the first time, the room... Over the next several hours, Marcus and Dr. Brooks outlined a series of reforms that would reach every facility in the hospital network. New protocols would require identity verification before security interventions. Emergency medical requests would receive independent review to prevent delays caused by personal bias. All staff, from executives to entry-level employees, would complete annual training focused on unconscious discrimination and professional accountability. An anonymous reporting system would allow workers to document concerns without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, patient care decisions would be monitored through transparent auditing tools developed by MedEquity Systems. Every recommendation was supported by data. Every policy had measurable goals. This was not symbolic change designed for headlines. It was structural reform designed to prevent future harm. Heather listened carefully as the plan developed. By the end of the meeting, she understood that her career at St. Gabriel Medical Center was over. Greg knew his future was uncertain as well. Yet Marcus never celebrated their downfall. He seemed focused only on ensuring that nobody else would experience what he had experienced. That calm determination impressed even the executives who had doubted him at the beginning of the day. 6 months later, the impact of those reforms could be seen throughout the hospital network. Employee complaints related to discrimination had decreased significantly. Emergency response times improved. Staff surveys showed higher levels of trust between departments. Independent auditors praised the transparency of the new systems. News outlets that once covered the controversy now reported on the hospital's transformation. One autumn morning, Marcus walked through the same lobby where the confrontation had begun. This time, people greeted him warmly. Nurses smiled. Doctors stopped to shake his hand. Security officers treated every employee with noticeably greater professionalism. Yet Marcus himself had not changed. He still wore the same Navy maintenance uniform. He still arrived before sunrise. He still preferred listening over speaking. A young nurse who had witnessed the original incident approached him near the elevators. "You could have become famous from all this," she said. Marcus laughed softly. "That's never what I wanted." She asked what he did want. Marcus glanced around the busy hospital. Patients were being helped. Employees were working together. Families felt safer. "Something better than attention," he replied. "Progress." Years later, people would still remember the day Marcus Reed was stopped outside the ICU. Some remembered the humiliation. Others remembered the revelation. But those who understood the story best remembered the lesson hidden beneath both moments. A person's worth cannot be measured by a uniform, a job title, or assumptions made in a few seconds. Real character reveals itself through actions, especially when circumstances become difficult. What happened at St. Gabriel became one of those rare life stories that spread far beyond a single city. It joined the ranks of Black stories, touching stories, and real-life stories that encourage people to question their own judgments. Marcus never became interested in revenge. He became interested in building something better. That choice changed an entire system, and perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Before you leave, think about a moment when someone was underestimated, ignored, or judged unfairly. What happened? Did anyone speak up? Share your experience in the comments below. Stories create awareness, and awareness creates change. If you enjoy powerful Black stories, inspiring life stories, touching stories, and meaningful real-life stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next unforgettable story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.